We're going to be looking at how is it that we use our time and our talents and our treasures in the service of, ultimately in the service of our faith. As you all, we have our introduction. I talk for about half an hour. We'll have a very brief Q&A, and then we break into groups. I'm not sure if it's group or groups tonight. I guess we'll figure it out as we go along. And then our pragmatic small group discussion. How do we apply this? How does this work? Before we share the best that we've learned and have our final Q&A. And it's all part of reviewing the spiritual disciplines of our, it's been the fourth in a series, with prayer, fastings, and scripture in our past, stewardship tonight, and the scriptures, sacraments next time. Tonight, we'll be looking at, firstly, understanding what stewardship is. Usually, this is a word that's used as a shorthand, and sometimes we believe that we understand it, and sometimes we're even correct when we understand it in that particular way as what the other person is trying to communicate. But more importantly is not the shorthand, but what we actually mean. What is it to steward our resources? So we'll look to an understanding of stewardship. We'll look to stewardship as time and labor. This is already somewhat of a definition of stewardship, but we'll go into more detail in just a moment. Time and labor, talents and abilities, treasures and resources. And then we'll look to how can we balance this? How can this live out in our life and make it so that it's neither too small nor too great? So first, what is this stewardship thing anyway? Stewardship in the Orthodox Church encompasses responsible and intentional management for all of the things that we have received. If that sounds big, it should. It's everything that is in our life. How do we use that best? So it's all the stuff that we've got, as well as all of the potential that we've got, as well as all of the things that we're given, the context that we're given, the time and place that we're given. How are we using that best? How do we define best? The one that's going to progress us towards sanctity. Now there's that will require some level of balance, and we'll get to that at the end of tonight's talk. But that balance is also part of responsible and intentional management of all that we have been given. So stewardship, it's responsible and intentional management of all that we've received. It recognizes that God has entrusted to us something very extraordinary. He's entrusted us to engage and contribute where we are, to our faith community, to the people around us. He's entrusted us with things that we ought to manage as best we can. Good stewardship recognizes that everything that we have, every good thing is a gift from above, coming down to us from the Father of lights. This results most directly in creating community in a parish. It results in a deepening of our faith individually. It results in how we support our fellow believers, and it's how we welcome the outsider. Good stewardship is a commitment to nurturing and growing the church and its community through active and purposeful engagement. It's not just maintenance. Sometimes stewardship can be put into those lines, or we've just got to get the ABCs of church management going. That's not what good stewardship is about. It's not just about maintenance. Ultimately, it's about building a home where all are valued, all are welcomed, all are supported, and all are sanctified. Each of those being critical parts of this. Our participation in our call to stewardship acknowledges our role and acknowledges this sacred calling in God's plan for the world. In short, when it talks about how we are a royal priesthood, it's our stewardship that actualizes this. The Bible does talk about how we are each, by virtue of our chrismation, this occurs, that we Christians are, that we are priests, as in that we offer sacrifices, because that's what it is to be a priest in this sense. To be a presbyter is different, but to be a priest is to offer a sacrifice, and we don't have that sacrifice of blood anymore. We don't have to take life to honor. Instead, we give of our life. That's our sacred calling that God gives us, that we are sent into this world for. There's three main categories of stewardship, and there are some things that kind of run into two categories. So many divisions and categorizations are like a little bit artificial, and that's okay. If we have the basic idea of there are three essential categories, and sometimes it's, you know, kind of open, that's good enough for us. Sorry? Yes, like a diagram. So as long as it's anywhere in those circles, it's stewardship, and it's all good. It may look like it's a different category. It may be two categories. It may even be three categories somehow. Either way, it's in that area, so it is stewardship. You have time. Time, talents, and treasures is the alliterative way that it's usually put. Because, you know, 3 T's, that's nice and memorable. Time and labor I'm putting together. So these tend to be simple and repetitive tasks. We have an abundance of time. We're able to put it to good use. Second, our talents or abilities or gifts or professions. Any of those four. Our potential probably is on the cusp of that, of time and talents, because our potential, we don't quite have the talent, but we probably will with a bit of extra time. So if we're talking about the Venn diagram between those two, our potential is in there. But talents, abilities, gifts, and professions, these are where we have abilities or qualifications or whatever the case that we are able to put to good use. Then there is probably what we would think of if someone said we need to get more stewardship. The thing that usually goes is, right, you're saying we need to fix our budget. And it's really, really black and white like that. I'm hoping over the course of tonight's talk that that it will be abundantly clear that that is not what I'm talking about when I'm using the word stewardship. But it is a part of it. So it includes our treasures, our resources, the things that we have, including the finances that we have. And there are three big categories. As with every other type, every other niche in the spiritual life, I have my boilerplate. And it's much further back than some of the others. And let me run through it rather quickly. The boilerplate beginning is to consider what you have been given in abundance or perhaps overabundance. Now, that's not a commitment, that's a consideration. To consider what you've been given in overabundance. Maybe that's what do you know that others don't? What can you do that others can't or don't seem to wish to? Do you have formal training in something, academic, vocational, etc.? Do you have an excess of time or finances or things? Second, consider what your parish may need. And maybe a list of things that your parish does can be particularly helpful here. The third one is to speak to your priest. Now, we'll go into that in more detail later on tonight, but that's the basic boilerplate for looking at how to do stewardship. What have you been given in overabundance? What might be needed? Then speak to someone who can put those two together. As always, and this is the case whether it's prayer or fasting, scripture, stewardship, or sacraments, the purpose is salvation. The purpose is formation to live the Christ-filled life. If you're not wanting to live it out, it is pointless. So this is a way that is eminently able to be lived out. If anything, the difficult part here is remembering the why. Sometimes we can lose that and be so focused on the what I do that we kind of bypass why we do it. That sound all right so far? No big gaping, what are you even talking about as yet? We may get there, that's okay. But I like my introduction to start off being understood. I think that's probably a good start. Let's talk about time and labor, where we redeem the time for the days are evil, as it says elsewhere in scripture. So this comes under the voluntary commitment of one's time, one's energy, one's effort in order to support the church community. Can happen in other ways too. Typically, this is done beginning with the church community. Now, time and labor it's especially good for those who want to give and haven't yet identified a way that their skills or their specialization can be utilized. It's especially good here. It's often the case that our youth, our young adults are in this particular category where, let's say a person is in, say, the first half of university. There's time, because of course all the assignments are done like the night before. The lectures, 10 hours a week and you're done. Maybe I'm revealing that I did an arts degree. But there's time, and the time commitments are relatively elastic. And so a person in such a position is able to offer their time, where perhaps they have significantly less money to offer, significantly less in the way of qualifications and so on to offer. But this they can offer. These tasks are our collaboration in our parish and in its mission. We dedicate ourselves to perform these regular, these simple, these repetitive tasks and activities because they need doing. Someone's got to do them. And well, for some, it can be a means towards humility. It's often the case that when we say, who'd like to volunteer, we're thinking about the up the front tasks in one way or another, whether liturgical, paraliturgical, or otherwise. We're thinking about the tasks that we see most clearly, and yet it's the stuff behind the scenes. This needs doing just as much as anything else. So this could include cleaning, mowing, groundskeeping, otherwise maintaining church premises. This can include decorating and event setup and pack up and clean up. This can involve preparing food and so many other possibilities besides. Things that I had one in there, repainting a wall. I understand that the first coat probably requires a bit of experience, a little bit of skill at least. I certainly don't feel confident in doing that without at least a trip onto YouTube. But repainting the wall, that takes biceps and time and not too much else. Paint and rollers, not too much else. And these are good examples of where time and labor can be sunk in to benefit the community at large. Second is on talents and abilities. Now, these are distinctive skills and aptitudes, qualities that each person has or can develop. Now, this could be anything from artistic and musical to leadership or organization and management, to teaching, technology use, analysis, carpentry and other trades. Things that require either a certification, a course, a qualification, or where you've put in an inordinate amount of time to learning the craft. It's not that the sheet of paper is necessary. What I'm thinking of in this category are things that not too many people can do. In any random 100, there might be only a couple. And these things, that's why I'm calling them talents and abilities. Now, using this does require recognizing and utilizing these unique skills to benefit others. As I said earlier, this can include potential. So, for instance, maybe a person hasn't finished their history degree, but they do need to do some essays. Maybe they're looking for some topics, a year in the life of, or the last 10 years of a particular parish. Well, a parish history is a valuable thing that everyone agrees is valuable and no one seems to quite have the time to do. But there's nothing more motivational than a deadline. And so these potential abilities, potential professions can likewise be used. When people offer their unique abilities, not only where time and labor solidifies a community, the talents and abilities makes it rich and vibrant. In some ways, it adds to the unique colors that come out in communities. Lastly, treasures and resources. These are much more quantifiable. So in some ways, we really like them much more because we can count them. We know exactly how much of what is there, whether bank account or inventory. Material possessions, financial assets, valuable items. Our assets, whatever they are entrusted to us for a greater purpose. Sometimes this greater purpose is we need a house to live in. Very, very functional, structural. Sometimes this purpose is, well, it continues on. We need to be looking after our dependents. We need to purchase groceries. Sometimes what we have is an overabundance. And when we have an overabundance, and we've looked into the near future, the foreseeable future, and gone, there is really no way that we're going to need more than this. Then we start looking, how can we be better stewards of this? This becomes a powerful tool for making positive impacts on church and people around us. We're enabling, once again, the church and its community to carry out its mission. The tough part really is balancing. I know in some places I don't think all the rage is really the term, but it's more common than not that a specific percentage is rolled out. That's not something that I'm really keen to do, and it's certainly not something that we've been traditioned, for better or for worse. It was a gentleman who was quite independently wealthy, and he was saying to me, "I don't agree with 10%, Father. I don't agree with this tithing being 10%, because we should know that tithing means a tenth. So you can't tithe 9%. It's a nonsense. You can tithe or you can just proportionally give, but tithing means 10%. Putting that to the side. I don't agree with tithing, Father. And I went, well, whatever you're going to say next, you've got a lot more authority to say it than most, because his income would have had extra numbers in it compared to most other people that I speak to. And he said, because most can give, sorry, not most. He said, because some can give much more than that. And 10% for them becomes a limiter. They go 10% and I'm done. I've done what I need to do. Or, okay, I've fallen short, but it's 9%. Well, that 1% is actually massive. Whereas, for example, I remember back to some of my younger years in university, and my 10% would not have gone missing. You could have found my 10% on the street in a particularly lucky day. What would be more valuable? What would be more valuable than that 10% is to donate some time, to donate the time that others didn't have the time for, but I would have at that point. None of these are superior. Not time, not talents, not treasures. They're not superior one to the other because they're all necessary. Trying to figure out which one's superior is the same kind of discussion that makes us wonder, would we rather be blind or deaf, or to not have a hand, or to whatever it is? When really the answer is none of the above. We want all of ourselves. We would rather not have a hand cut off just to prove a point. So each of these are important because it's about what we offer. It's not about my expectations of you or you. It's about what are you able to offer. Between each of those offerings, we have a fully functional community. It is important for there to be ongoing self-reflection. And there are difficulties here. The difficulties can be one of those difficulties can be if we've got a given way that we participate, and perhaps we've done what I'm most familiar with, the university student path, where we've given our abilities and then we continue on, and our life has changed, but our volunteering has not. Our stewardship has not. Sometimes it needs to be revised up. Sometimes it needs to be revised down. Sometimes it needs to be changed entirely. And each of those can happen. And so just like with a prayer rule or fasting rule and so on, it helps to be in consultation with your confessor, and if it's different, and with your priest. I'm going to make sure that this is edifying for you, not breaking you. I'm going to go a little bit more into that boilerplate that I spoke about earlier. I think it will be helpful. When we consider what we've been given in overabundance, what we know, what we do, what we have training in, what time we have, what finances we have. And we consider what the parish needs, which is, well, in its own way, each of the things that you can think of. It's probably what a parish needs. And speak to your priest. One of the things that I give as a recommendation, volunteer for something. I think that that's very important, that each person volunteers for something. That said, I would counsel avoid accepting direct responsibility for more than 4 things, whatever they are, because there's no way that, okay, for most, there is no way that you can be giving your full attention to 4 or more things. Not if you're working or raising a family or most circumstances, really. But what can you do? I reckon for most, I think it's somewhere between 1 and 3. I should also say that this, for those who are inquiring, those prior to baptism, haven't finished catechism course, I would count pre-baptismal formation as 2. There's a lot to do there. You're changing the way that you think, you're changing the way that you are, changing a lot of habits. That's good. do that. That's the most important way that you can be contributing to your community right now. There's going to be plenty of time for more later. All right, in conclusion, there's many ways to give. All of them are valuable. Whether it's your time and labor, your talents and abilities, or your treasures and resources, all are of value, because all of them between each other is how we build the body of Christ. All right, I'm going to pause there. Were there any questions that we had before we go to our groups? You may have noticed that this, Liam will be up in just a moment. You may have noticed that that this talk was a little shorter than others. And well, I'm okay with that. It's a very practical talk, and I wanted to give more time to the discussion. And the discussions, I'd like them to be focusing on a few things. How is it that you are or would like to be stewarding what God has given you? How did you find out what you could give? If you don't have an answer for this one, pass, someone else should. And how do you balance your stewardship commitments with, well, your work and your external life? So they're the three broad areas that I hope we'll be able to be discussing in our groups. So questions, Liam? Yes. So for the benefit of those online and to make sure that I understand your question, the question, if I understand correctly, is what does a person do if they're not sure where they should be volunteering? Is that more or less? Yeah. All right. Consider, what can I do that others can't? What do I do that others don't want to? What do I know that others don't seem to? What qualifications do I have? What do I seem to have that's in excess of what I need? And consider what the church might need, what the parish might need. You may not know everything, because most people don't, and that's okay. Like, I don't expect everyone to know the ins and outs, but give a consideration and then present those when you speak to your priest, because he's probably the one who does know, firstly, you, and secondly, how the church functions and how it operates and where it needs a bit of extra support. So I feel like that's the first part of your question was, what do you do if you want to volunteer, but you're not quite sure how? It seems like the second part was, does that change over time? That's a reasonable summary. So what happens when that changes over time? And I would expect that it would change over time. I would certainly hope that it would change over time, for that matter. A person who is, let's say a person who is, they rock up to choir one week and they're not quite sure, so they're kind of singing quietly in the back, and they're going to be more confident over time, I hope. They're going to be, they're going to make the decision to come to choir practices because, well, that's where we got to be. That person, I would hope, would then go through one of the development pathways that are available, whether being the lead singer in their section or one of the lead singers in their section, one of the pillars of the choir, to reading in church, to perhaps conducting or being able to conduct in the absence of the conductor. After all, sickness doesn't ask if you've got to sing at church on Sunday. So we do need people who are able to step in a pinch, even if they don't want to do that on an ongoing basis. And that's just within the choir. A person who volunteers to, let's say they're on the cleaning roster, and then they finish their degree, and then they volunteer their abilities as a, I don't know, lawyer. Just randomly. Father Stephen reckons that's a bad choice, but you know. So So I would hope that it would change over time, and I would expect it to. It may well be that a person goes from volunteering to in a cleaning roster to managing that cleaning roster. Like there's all sorts of possibilities as time goes on. It is also possible that a person may be quite happy doing that for 50 years. And there's far from anything wrong with that. It's, once again, it's what would you like to give? Further questions, especially for prior to our group activity? Let's address that one. Can stewardship simply be about charity and giving? And yes, it can be. So I suppose the church, the local parish church, should be the first place you think of, and probably should be included. It doesn't have to be the only place. If someone needs a set of bookshelves built, and you're able to build them, then that is also stewarding your gifts for someone else. So, yeah, it is. And this is why we have these talks, so that we're not assuming that we all know what each other means by these, I guess, technical terms, because they are a little specialized, and this clears it up in the way that it should be. Yes. How does chronic health change what stewardship looks like? Or chronic health problems, rather. Chronic health would be great. Chronic health problems is the issue. So how does chronic health problems change that? It doesn't, because you're still needing to be good stewards of what you have been given. So the things that you do may need to change in order to still remain a good steward of what you have and have not been given. So it means, well, not burning yourself out knowingly. Like, if you've seen this movie before and you didn't like the ending, don't do it again. So the burnout is something not to aim for, something to aim away from. It'll mean reevaluating what it is that you actually can do in a real sense. Not what you wish you could do, not what you were able to do, but what you are now able to do. And some of that is going to be, I don't know what I can do. Yeah, and figure it out. And that's going to be part of good stewardship too. You will need to kind of tap on the boundaries and then go, nope, that's a real boundary, or that's not a real boundary, or I can do that once, but not 2 days in a row, or et cetera, et cetera. So good stewardship is still necessary. Let's take the most extreme example. Someone who is bedridden. I don't know, their legs don't work. Like worse than the grandparents in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And they, what can they do? Well, maybe not too much. They do have time. Their arms work. What can they do with what they do have? Probably the first thing is to try to do what they can do. But a lot of it is going to be what kind of chronic illness and how can you use what you do have. Make sense? Yeah. And last one from one of our online folks. Apart from sickness or absence from the parish, is stepping away from stewardship encouraged or historically necessary? That is stewardship something that continues as a service to the church indefinitely? So it is necessary to be good stewards. If we're following Christ, we need to be good stewards. What that means is a bit more difficult. It'll probably, as we said before, it'll change over time. There's going to be differences. Sickness, as was pointed out, will impact on that. Moving will impact on that. So it's one of the things that in my best at my best, I try to do is to speak with people who are volunteering, particularly who are leading volunteer groups, and say, is this still somewhere that you want to be? Because maybe the answer is no. Maybe someone is wildly overloaded, and well, I'm not omniscient. And we just do what we are able to do. So a person needs to continue to be good stewards of what they can do. But if that needs to change, so be it. So what awesome stuff did we find out? I know we had some big chats online. If some people can highlight the good stuff, then that would make my life so much easier. And our good people sitting rather in front of me. There's people from our inside group and our outside group. So how did we go? What did we learn for each of these? So let's look at these. How are you stewarding the gifts that God's gifts to you? It's a very difficult question for us to answer, but if I can give a précis, we had people who were serving liturgically, choir, altar, heard people serving in candle desk, heard people serving on AV, and various parts. What other ones did we have? What other forms of service did we have? Fundraising, yeah. It was pointed out by some priest who'll remain anonymous and is definitely not the one talking right now, that fundraising is important, and it happens one way or another. Other means, our deanery youth committee came up, had a great big chat about that. Other means, yes. For our recording, Father Stephen pointed out that there are doubtless many ways that we are stewarding in ways that we may not even be considering simply by living out our spiritual life. Yes, knowledge management is the corporate businessy term for that, but it's the same principle, making sure that the knowledge doesn't die with the person, because that actually happens. As bizarre as that sounds, there's been considerable amounts of knowledge that has gone to the grave with a person, and we don't have it. And that was an unbroken chain going back, I don't know how long, but at least a couple of centuries back, and it's gone now. It reached its finite point, and there's we can try to recover it by trial and error and this, that, and the other thing. But that particular thread is finished. So making sure that we're not the only ones who know how to do a thing. There's a saying that I particularly like, that our job isn't over until someone else can do our job. Particularly when we're volunteers. Like, I understand why someone might be precious about their own job. They're paying for their family and so on and so on. And so they may not tell the new hire that one thing that keeps their job secure. But we don't have that same incentive, I hope, in a church community. So making sure that someone else is able to do your job is really, really important. Other things we picked up? Well, let's continue through the questions. How can you be stewards? How did you find out what you could give? So we did have some conversations about how could we be stewards, and covering off some of the things that well, I seem to be good at this and that, and not everyone seems to be, and that's where it starts. I'm sure that I know there were conversations in our outside group. I'm sure there were some with our inside group along similar lines. And how do we balance? Anyone come up with ways to balance that they thought were worth sharing? The point was made that some jobs are bigger than others, and not to look for not to try to compare. They've got two jobs, why can I only do one? Because the jobs aren't the same, and so that's everything about it is different, and that's okay. Roughly a summary of what you were saying. Cool. some things online. A really important thing to have is the willingness to offer to do whatever needs to be done. Sometimes your profession is something that you don't particularly want to do on the weekends, and so you do something that is structurally different to that. So maybe your role is very tradesy and very physical, but on the weekends you want to be creative, or vice versa, and that can be a good pairing. The mundane things, so even if it's mundane, that's still a good thing to volunteer. In fact, some say that the mundane is where it's at, because you do what no one else wants to do, and by that you make sure that there's no gaps. Setting up and packing up. Service liturgically. Sometimes the difficulty is that you kind of know what you want to do, but you don't quite know who to talk to, which for those who are members of our parish, there's an organization chart hidden somewhere in the rector's report in one of the pages, and that's not as accessible as I would want it to be. If you go onto our church website and find ministries, then you're able to see who's in charge of what, and that's a pretty up-to-date list. But if you're not sure, then ask. When we actually have our own church building, we're able to put the sheet of paper up, but it's tricky now. Sunday school is a good place to be volunteering. Hey, Father. Should be compulsory. Okay, that's good. We're very subtle here. One pointed out that the question is poorly framed. How do we balance stewardship with life commitments is the wrong question, because stewardship is part of our life commitments. How is it that we look after what we've been given is a responsibility. That it's like if you're going out to dinner, then you need to know how to use a knife and fork. Like, the two just go together, or you should. One way to work out, are you doing too much, are you not doing enough, is discussing with family, spouse before committing. Sometimes they know you a little better than you know yourself. Burnout's an issue, got highlighted. And I mentioned, and this will be my last thing, about the idea of 100 hours, the 100 good hours in a week. And this is, it's something that kind of I've thought up. So if you say, oh, that priest doesn't really know what he's talking about, that's okay. You're allowed to. But I think it's not half bad. So there's 168 hours in the week, right? This means yes. You've got 168 hours in a week, but good stewardship of your time means that you're probably sleeping for 7 times 8, 56 of them. Or if not sleeping, then going to sleep. So let's just rule them out. And then there's just the miscanoobly boo that doesn't really fit anywhere. So let's just round it off at 100 hours. 100 good hours in a week. That's roughly right, more or less. And from there, well, then how do you budget your 100 good hours? What are you going to use that on? Now, hopefully, I trust, you will put aside Sunday morning. You've put aside the various times for being at worship with your community. You have put aside time for prayer. And you've put aside time for whatever work you do. You put aside time for eating's probably good. Like, that'll need a bit of time. You've put aside time for this and that and the da. Now, if we do, and this is an if, but if we do run with that 10% idea, this is not half bad. If you're going for a number, then it's not a bad number. Then, well, that gives you an indication of maybe that's a place to aim for. Maybe to start off with, you don't go for 10 immediately. You just inch your way into it. What can I do? Well, I can do this, so let's do this. And a couple of weeks later, you go, that was nothing. And I'll do a bit more. Volunteering for multiple things at once, don't recommend it. Slow changes are the other changes that stick. So go for one thing, pick it up, run with it. Your 100 good hours gives you an idea of especially if your main contribution is time and labor, well, that's a pretty good idea of what time and labor can go towards good stewardship. I think that's probably us for this evening. Thank you all. I know that this is unusual circumstances, being upstairs rather than downstairs. We will be returning next time. We'll be looking at the sacraments. For some here, the sacraments that you're looking towards are baptism and chrismation. For others, it's confession and communion. Either way, it's we're looking towards these sacraments and how they are such a fundamental part of the spiritual life. For what it's worth, I'm guessing that we will be focusing much more on confession and communion because, well, baptism and chrismation happens once. It's a one-time thing and you're done. Confession and communion, this will keep on being a part of the Christian walk and the Christian life. Because the same one who said, follow me, is the one who said, unless you eat and drink, you have no life in you. And we take him at his word both times. So that'll be next week, unless otherwise advertised. Please make sure that you're part of our newsletter or Telegram or Discord or one of those, and that you actually get the notifications. Because if there's any changes to that, that's how we're going to be letting you know. We're all part of that, right? Right? This means yes, this means no. Yes. Looking at the people online as well. Everyone, let's conclude with prayer. It is truly meet to bless thee, O faithful ones, and the blessed and blameless and glory, who without corruption gave this birth to God the world, the very potency to be magnified. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to all those who joined us online, and we'll see you in church.